disruption, there's no need for any further action to be taken in relation to that. And I'm sorry, Mr. Niven, I think I interrupted you in relation to what you were saying were the perceived benefits of incorporation by NCA CEOP into the NCA.
Yes, this also has enabled us to have a 24/7 emergency response as well. We have a control centre based up in the north of England, and that same hub enables us to house additional members of staff. We have since now recruited another 174 members of staff that are working across CEOP towards this threat, and that also has enabled us to develop our work with partners. So we have a number of partners that work for us on a pro bono basis. These are members of staff from the NSPCC, 7 members of staff that work for us, staff from the Border Force, BAE Systems, Visa. So we've become a much stronger unit as CEOP, but we're even stronger by being part of the National Crime Agency.
Do you think there are any disadvantages to being part of the National Crime Agency?
No, I can't see that there are, because I've, in my experience with the CEOP and National Crime Agency, it has only been of a benefit, because when we have had times when we've required additional staff and support and the expertise, then I've been able to draw on that, and those resources have been made available.
Okay. That brings me on to the topic of funding, and perhaps we can just look at that, and that will be a convenient moment for the day. Can I ask you, please, about the financial resourcing of CEOP, and just bear with me one moment. The panel are aware that in 2014, following the summit by the then Prime Minister, Mr. Cameron, he announced that there would be a £10 million worth of additional funding provided to NCA CEOP.
Yes, that is correct.
And I'd like just to look, please, at your budget, which I think is dealt with at your paragraph 66. And is this the position that for 2017 into 18, and for that financial year, the CEOP budget amounts to some £14.61 million?
Yes, that is correct.
Now, it's fair to note that there is additional funding made available to undertake specific projects and programmes.
Yes, that's true. 1.8 million has been taken out of that budget for IT and additional staff working elsewhere across the agency.
The overall NCA budget is, I think, summarised in an exhibit. Can we call up, please, NCA 000220, and Chair, it's behind tab 10. And it's the final page, in fact, of that exhibit at page 19. This page comes from the National Crime Agency annual plan for 2017 into 18. And if one looks there at the overall figure, there is what's called a departmental expenditure limit. What is that in simple terms?
That is where we can, as I understand it, that is where we can make capital payments which don't require ongoing financial support. So they would be to purchase one-off purchases, whereas the other resource is in relation to continuing expenditure.
Right. It amounts to, though, some 436.9 million is the overall NCA budget for this financial year.
That is true.
And so when one contrasts that figure of 436 odd million with the 14.61 million that it comes to NCA CEOP, there is a vast distinction between the overall budget and the budget that comes to NCA CEOP. And one might take the view that actually the CEOP budget is relatively small in comparison with the overall NCA budget. One doesn't want to be overly simplistic about it, but on any analysis of those figures, the CEOP budget is a fraction of the overall budget? And why is it such a relatively small amount when looking at the global figures available to NCA?
Yeah. So just to start with the 14.61 million, as I said, 1.8 million has been taken out of that already for employing support staff outside of CEOP, which takes it to 16.41 million, if my records are correct. And I think it goes back to the benefits of being part of the agency, because there are a number of services and supports that are provided to CEOP from the wider agency which aren't paid for or captured out of the CEOP budget. So when we look at our technical support for some of our investigations, that support is provided from the wider agency. Equally, when we look at areas such as HR and estates and admin support, because we've grown as a team, those aren't captured in that budget either. So there's a significant amount of support from the NCA that enables CEOP to operate the way that it actually does, but that's not captured in the individual budget that's allocated to the teams themselves, because most of that is about salary.
Who is responsible for effectively asking for a certain amount of money to go towards the CEOP out of the overall budget?
Well, that's in the budget planning, and that's very much based on the threat and the risk. So these budgets can change, depending on what that threat and risk is, and that would then be decided, and then the budget would be allocated to the director, so that director can spend the funding accordingly, and that's reviewed on a regular basis about how that spending takes place.
So in essence, there are competing arguments between the respective departments, between CEOP, for example, those investigating cybercrime or whatever other crime it is that the NCA is investigating. There will be a tension between those respective departments asking for funding.
It's based on threat, harm and risk, and CEOP is a priority for the agency, and therefore their budget is allocated accordingly. But if we require additional resource, then we're not in the position where we can't get that resource. We would go and we would bid through our tasking process, and those resources would be made available. For example, I think the previous witness mentioned an operation that took place in November of last year where 192 people were arrested in a week. Well, resources to enable that operation to take place were drawn from the wider agency. Now, they're not costed in our budget, but they are available to us, as are the resources of National Policing as well, who also supported that operation. So it's an individual budget to be managed to pay for the members of staff that work within CEOP, but actually it doesn't reflect the picture of the investment that's actually provided by the organisation.
Well, I was going to ask you about that, because when you say, of course, that CSEA is a priority for the NCA, one might take the view, well, it's not much of a priority if it's actually only being afforded 14.6 million per annum. And I think the point you make is, of course, it shouldn't be looked in isolation.
Yes.